All right, here we go. Episode 43 of the Lucas Grandsire podcast. You know the deal, super creative name, super creative guy, all that stuff. Very excited about our guest today, of course, talking to Cody Merrow, who's a producer behind some of the best shows in MMA, of course, Anik and Florian, Remember the Show, all that good stuff. What's going on, man? How are you?
Lucas, happy to be here, man. Episode 43, ready to get it done. How you doing, my man?
I wish we had a sexier number for you. Be like, episode 69, episode 100, episode 50, but 43, I mean, that's us. That's unique.
Hey, we'll make it our own.
So listen, man, you've been a producer on some of these big shows. I assume for you doing Remember the Show, whenever the next one is, that's going to be a pretty fun one considering Bilal Muhammad is fired up.
Yeah, man. Number 5 in the world just crept up. I was thinking the other day, when we started the show, I had to write criminally unranked, and now he's number 5 in the world. I've had to keep adjusting it. So just crazy. We're coming up on episode 50, going to do an award show with him, get him in a little tuxedo t-shirt, because he likes to party. He wants his Bilal to party. So it's going to be really interesting stuff, man. Appreciate you bringing it up.
You were like, hopefully we'll be talking about a Bilal Muhammad win, but that was a tough fight. I mean, and I really appreciated the way he stepped into it. Because how many times have we seen a guy come up against Stephen Thompson, try to kickbox him, fail at kickboxing him, lose 10-9 every round, and then go home frustrated? So fans don't like it, but you know what? For me, that was incredibly smart the way he and his team kind of, took this fight.
Well, and it seemingly happens all the time, right? People are like, "Oh, they know the blueprint to beat Wonder Boy," but then Wonder Boy wins fights. So it's like the blueprint's laid out for him. Why is he winning all these fights? It's a lot easier said than done. And Bilal went out there and performed, the best game plan that he could. I thought it was better than what Gilbert Burns put on Wonder Boy. I thought, Woodley put out 10 rounds of how to beat Wonder Boy, and that still wasn't as dominant as what Bilal did to him. And something I did say on the podcast before with Wonder Boy, it's a little lazy to always say, oh, father time this, father time that. But when you get older, the things that are going to get weak first are your weaknesses. So his weakness, takedown defense, ground striking, all these things, that's what showed up in that fight. And Bilal was able to take advantage.
The big thing I saw too is people were criticizing because as soon as you use wrestling and you don't go straight kickboxing against a guy like Stephen Thompson, it's like, oh, you didn't feel like fighting and all that stuff. But it's like we've seen the guys that beat Stephen Thompson, and it has to get ugly to do it. I mean, everyone who's beaten him got criticized for their performance. I mean, Woodley, who is going to get criticized for everything at this point, but it's like that's the way you beat a guy like that. You cannot go out there and be like, I'm going to flatline him in the first round. No, because he's going to stand sideways, kick you across the cage, and you're just going to get frustrated.
Yeah, styles make fights, and when you fight a pretty fight, that's Wonder Boy's fight. It's interesting to think about. Sage Northcutt, he would fight pretty fights too. He was just not as talented as Wonder Boy, and you saw what happened to him. So you can't go out there and fight Wonder Boy's fight, or else you're going to lose, and that's what all these guys have to do. And unfortunately, if you're not, a complete fan of MMA, that stuff is kind of boring to you. But for me, as a a purist fan, I guess, there's nothing like a win like that. There are different wins when people do lay on top of people for the entire ground control. I think Bilal had 12 minutes of control time, but it was, advancing control time. It wasn't anything that I thought was lazy, but people are always going to have their own opinions, especially when they beat somebody as likable as Wonder Boy. So it was a tough fight, but 30-26 on a couple of the cards. I think that's a pretty impressive win.
Or there was a 30-25 in there too. Like when I heard 30-25, I was like, against Wonder Boy, like give the man his respect. I don't care what the fight looked like. 30-25?
Yeah, any ranked opponent.
Exactly. But and the cool thing is, I believe now he's ranked number 5. So it's like, because sometimes you'll get the big win and you move up, and it's like you're at number 7 or those shitty spots where you can't do much with it. But number 5, like now we're talking, now we're cooking. Like it's good to see. You need the one big win to put you over, and now it's just time to stay in that top 5 zone.
Yeah, well, I feel like every fighter, when they go into a fight, they're, well, when I win, I'm going to call out. They looking above themselves in the right.
Yeah.
No one's looking behind them at a name or anything like that. Now you have to look at Bilal's name when you look at the top 10 rankings. Anytime Jorge looks at the rankings, he's going to look at Bilal's name above him. Those fights are now on the table, whereas before it's a little easier to say, oh, poo-poo, because of the rankings, this, that, or the other. And so I think there's a lot of interesting fights now at 170, especially they're talking about Usman taking a lot of time off, maybe 6 to 8 months just to, I think he deserves it. He's fighter of the year, in my opinion. I think taking that time off is deserved. If he wants to take that time, more than welcome. There shouldn't be any interim discussions. Let these guys fight it out. I think there are a lot of good matchups at 170.
So what did you think of his call out? Obviously, you're probably a little biased, right? But I appreciated what he did with the post-fight interview, because how many times has DC, I think it was Sean Brady, where he was like, who do you want? Who do you want? No, I'm good. And it's like, damn it, use that. And Bilal, that was ready. That felt a little like he knew exactly what he was going to say. Even the fudge, the calculated fudge instead of fuck. I was like, that's a strategic ESPN Plus move right there. What did you think of his call out? Because he kind of skipped everybody and said, "Fuck it, give me the champion."
Yeah, well, so the interesting thing about that, Bilal has never he doesn't swear. He like in his
Yeah.
regular life, he just doesn't swear. So it was funny that I was actually watching it like at a party on mute and the subtitles were like get the bleep out of here.
What?
What? I was like, Bilal swore. I was like, that's crazy. And I went back and watched it and he said fudge. And I was just like, oh, that's hilarious because he doesn't swear. But I thought in that moment, he came on the podcast on yesterday and he was talking about how he's like, yeah, I could have said this and I a bit regret not saying that. But in the moment, I think we're talking about it still a couple days later. I think there's plenty of people talking about it. Bilal, for better or for worse, people want to talk about him. I am on the positive side. A lot of people want to be on the negative side. I think that's a good place to be, where people care about what you're doing when you're fighting. Whereas like, I love Gregor Gillespie, but nobody has ever really had a huge emotion behind him. And that's what he's seeing. He went 14, 15 fights without really getting the good matchups. And now he understands that he's going to talk the talk a little bit to get those matchups.
The thing about Gregor is there was at one point, just to kind of push back a little bit, he did get a lot of negative attention. I think he came out and put this big post about Trump or something like that. And
Yeah.
everybody finally started coming after him. And it was like, well, you pay attention to him now. And then he got knocked out against Kevin Lee and everybody was cheering. But it's like, that is not the kind of shit you want. Like, that is not. But I appreciated him coming out and making that video about Tony Ferguson. I was like,
Yeah. That's a great fight.
we really had to push him. But you know what? It's fine. And it's a good name, too. Sometimes they get unrealistic. You're like, come on, man. But T Ferg, like, that's a good fight.
Yeah, for sure.
So the thing too about Bilal, just to come back to him, because I was thinking like, since I'm writing about MMA full time, I'm like aware of, potential matchups, who has beef and stuff. I feel like there were two names for him that could have been maybe made a little bit more sense. There's a clear storyline there, like Hamzat Chimaev, obviously, but he had said enough for me that there could have been something there if that's something he was interested in. And style wise too, like I feel like he showed against Wonderboy, willing to go to the ground, willing to do what it takes. Against Hamzat Chimaev, if you come in there thinking I'm not going to the ground, then you've already failed. And then also Colby Covington. So apparently there's like some real legitimate fudging beef in that one. Like apparently Bilal said like hates the guy, can't stand him. So to me, it sounds like you have some heat. And then, for me, that could have been an interesting fight to sort of go with in that post-fight interview.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's just like maybe the trickle down effect, aim at the top and you end up calling out all the people below. But I think the Kobe thing is real, man. I've seen, the same interviews as you had, pre-fight, post-fight, where he's talking about if he sees Kobe on site, like it's going to be like that because Kobe has said a lot of disparaging things, against Muslims, against, really against anyone that doesn't look exactly like Kobe, for better or for worse, for his persona. But yeah, that's real beef. I think that's a great matchup as well. And maybe part of it too is you don't want to give shine to somebody when there's no reason. Like, so I think calling out Usman is respect. No one can hate on that. He's the
No.
champion. Talking about Leon Edwards, and they have a lot of history. I don't know if I don't remember if Burns was in the post fight call out, but I'm sure that name has to be in that conversation now. And yeah, Hamzat was just the one that did escape, and then everyone. Then it seems like he's avoiding it, right? And that's the unfortunate thing about the things that you don't say versus the things that you do say. But they're on Twitter going at it now. Needing Art, I want to make sure I shout him out. He did a great post about it that's going back and forth the internet that nobody's tagging him in. So yeah, I think that's a good matchup as well.
Ooh, that Hamzat Chimaev stuff is so frustrating. Like I saw Dana White go on his podcast and he's like, everybody's scared to fight him. I was like, oh, come on. And then all these people start coming out like, I'm trying to fight the guy. And it's like, no, but that's not who he wants. So it's like, are they scared to fight or the people he wants don't want to fight him? It just,
Right.
and and Neil Magny, I mean, how the guy for years has been talking nonstop about Hamzat Chimaev. And I talked to Jeff Neal on the same day the news came out about the DWI, so that kind of got lost with all the craziness. But
Yeah.
even he was like, that's clearly strategic. That's trying to bait those top 5 guys into saying something. But I hate hearing stuff like that because I'm all for, the hype trains and getting excited for someone like Hamzat. But if you're a UFC welterweight, it's got to be so frustrating to hear that. And these guys are fighters, they're competitive. So all of them probably had the fire lit under their ass. Like, damn it, I'll take that fight.
Yeah, well, that is the thing. They're all fighters. That's the funny part when people are like, "This person's scared," of that person's like, I mean, they get paid to fight people. Like, that's not like it's not like you're a lawnmower contractor showing up and they're like, "Hey, can you do our roofing?" It's like, no, like it's not like that at all. Like that's what they showed up to do. So they're gonna fight. And I think a lot of the times a lot of that stuff gets misconstrued, you know, one-way traffic sometimes where so and so says, "Oh, this person agreed, but then they backed out," or "This person won't fight me," and blah blah blah. But then the other fighter hasn't heard about that at all. Like
Yeah.
there's so much he said, she said, but he didn't say or she didn't say in this in the industry, like as a whole, you know, trickles down into the fighters, and unfortunately, that's part of how it plays out. Is like, you know, so and so is ducking so and so as if Bilal doesn't say yes when that phone rings if it's Hamzat Chimaev, you know, like he damn sure does. You know, I believe he's posted the text before of him telling Ali that he wants to fight him. So, it's there's definitely no niceties. I think when it comes to in terms of Bilal, he's a real fighter. You know, in terms of all the fighters that I've interacted with, like you know, that's how they come. That's why you love them. I think that's why a lot of people connect with the fighters. That's why, you know, Donald Cerrone is everyone's favorite fighter, right? Because anytime, anywhere, he'll sign the dotted line. That's what we love to see as fans of the sport.
So tell me a little bit about Remember the Show, because I remember at one point, since we're remembering the show, I think it started off like he was on Instagram Live, I think, inviting people on, getting it to see who's going to do the craziest thing. You kind of came in, everything looks real professional, and the guests are stacked. Tell me a little bit about Remember the Show and how that came together.
Yeah, so I had come onto the Anik and Florian podcast, and I was talking to John. You know, we got our flow a little bit doing that podcast and doing some good things. And we're talking about like, I was like, yo, like, you know, I only really have content from the Monday show. Like, it doesn't really carry through the week to be able to grow, like to be able to continue to post. And so we were talking, and he was like, you know, John had this idea. It was like, oh, well, I've always thought about Bilal Muhammad as being a great personality for a show. And then Bilal had already been doing these like Instagram live games with like fans. He was doing like Deal or No Deal or stuff like that. And so we contacted Bilal and we were like, hey, like we want to give you a show. We think you should co-host it with John Anik's brother, who had just he was a part of a company that got bought out, and so he had just time on his hands and you know a lot of you know free will just as far as his Thursday nights were concerned. And so we were able to connect with Jason Anik, and obviously because he's twin brothers with John, we thought it was just a funny tie-in. At first, you know, that's where it began. But Jason, knowledgeable at the sport, you know, he probably watches just as many, if not more, live fights than John, just because when John's not there, he's 100% focused on not, being with his kids and focusing on the fights when he can. So we involved Jason and we talked to Bilal, and we were just working together to try to transfer, like, you know, you do these Bics that are awesome. Like, he's a great picker. I think his stats are 63% or something on the year since we've been doing the show. We're like, how do we combine the pick section as well as like involving fighters and, you know, adding in your flavor, like adding in what makes you you, why people like you. And so Bilal had the idea to do the game show, carry that over. And as we've been able to do that, and the technology has gotten better, obviously, within COVID, we've just been able to refine it, and continue to get down to, you know, having all these guests, honestly, is all Bilal. Like, that's just him, like being able to DM all these guys, like constantly he'll be like replying to DC's story, like, yo, that was an awesome tweet that you made the other day. You want to come on the show? Like, just like hilariously badgering, you know, as a verified person, you're in a different inbox. So it's just funny. And all the credit to him, man. We've had amazing guests on the show. Like, I think over 100 personalities and fighters may be coming up on that. Excited to keep it going. Like I said, episode 50 is coming up. We're going to do an award show. Hopefully big things coming for Remember the Show in the future.
Has he came to you with a guest where for a second you had to, take off your producer hat, put the fan hat back on, and be like, "Holy fuck, I can't believe this guy's coming on the show."
Yeah, I mean, so many times, to be honest, because like, you know, we had Dustin Poirier on, Michael Bisping, you know, DC, obviously we finally got on. Just almost like so many that you don't even think about it, because in the moment I'm trying to make sure I don't fuck up the game show
Right.
or like mess up any of the timings or anything like that. And there is a lot of prep that goes into it beforehand. Like, you know, I'll start compiling at about an hour before, or a couple out, like 8 hours before. I'll get the guys a rundown where I'm like, here's the links to their typology. Here are a few facts. Like, here's upcoming fights that they're having. Here are some headlines I want to hit on. Like, a big part of the show to me is like hitting that halfway. Like, it's a live show. It's hitting that aspect between like, oh, Bilal's a fighter, Jason's brother's John, and we're also having like MMA Twitter people on, like Booger Beard or Seek Rambler, who's like one of Bilal's friends, or Aaron Bronstetter, who's a great journalist, like kind of blending all the mix of we don't have to necessarily have fighters on. Like we want to give different angles and give people a voice that maybe didn't have it before, as far as having some content.
Do you have to kind of be careful who you have on? 'Cause as soon as you start venturing into MMA Twitter, you can get some crazy people on the show. And I've seen some of the clips where you have certain guys you're like, oh boy, that I assume as a producer you have that leave studio finger just ready because it's like I don't know what this guy's gonna do. But I assume for MMA Twitter in particular, there's got to be some pretty scary characters, yeah, that come on the show.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have any. We have honestly haven't had much problem as far as like having live guests. Like we've had fan shows before where we just tweet out the link to join, and whoever the first 8 people that can get in there are the ones that we have on. So luckily,
Wow.
knock on wood, we haven't had any terrible things happen. But I think it just comes out of like respect for the community, and people genuinely want to come on. And we've had people from all over the world, like middle people from the Middle East, people from the UK, people from America, people from Chicago that Bilal didn't know but have gone to his dad's store, like his cousins, like blending all of that stuff. I guess it's just been like a really respectful community. Whereas, yeah, like I love Booger Beard, but imagine if Booger Beard held a show and just sent out a live link or something like that. The kind of crazy things that would happen on that. It'd be hard to sponsor that. I'll say that.
Just Booger Beard alone, just sponsoring him, like every sentence he's gonna give is gonna be something sexually explicit, and you're just like, oh fuck,
Right.
like
I mean,
I
hey,
mean,
there's a lane for that. There's advertising specifically.
hey, Manscaped. I mean, apparently they'll sponsor just about everyone. I mean, if you're gonna sponsor someone, Booger Beard talking about people's balls seems like a great way to bring Manscaped into it.
Yeah. Hey, they should give you a commission for that.
So, how is it for you? Because you're doing it live. A lot of it depends on people coming in on time. Let's be honest. We know fighters aren't always great at that. You'll tell them, "Hey, we need you at 4." They show up at 4:45, like with the McDonald's cup. Like, oh my bad. I've heard Daniel Cormier. I've heard some stories about him behind the scenes where he'll show up 3 hours later, or he'll fall asleep while people are calling him. Like it's gotten pretty crazy. How are you guys for that? Because I assume there's that pressure too. Like you need to show up on time.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I'll first of all, DC was like 15 minutes early for our show. He was
Wow.
ready to go, came in with his Wi-Fi all set and ready. So, hey,
Ooh,
no shade upon DC
yeah.
from Remember the Show. He's the Remember the Show champ, triple champ, I guess now. But a lot of it comes down to just being flexible, like having we kind of set up the show in a loose manner to the fact that like we have segments, but it's loose in the sense that Bilal can throw to the like I'm kind of an active producer in the sense that I'm like engaging with the guys like as if I can, if I see an opening or behind the scenes, making sure that they know when the guys come in, like that we have a plan. Like we used to we used to have a lot of music elements to the show. Like we'd intro somebody with like a remix version of their song so that it didn't get copyright flagged or something like that. And like there was just a lot of complexity with that, so we decided it was just better to keep it organically flowing but then still have the roles as far as Jason kind of leading and Bilal being the interviewer. And then yeah, the timing, we just get out ahead of it. I have a like a spiel that I have copied into our email rundown that Bilal can copy, and it kind of lists out like, here are the things that you're going to need. Like, here's what's going to happen. Like, you're going to be live when you're on. Like, that's an important part to tell them before, because we're just popping them in. And then, yeah, just being sometimes we'll have somebody early and we'll talk to them for like 5 or 6 minutes. Jason and Bilal are really good at like flowing into an interview. And then let's say we're running like a couple of minutes past time. Boom, I pop the person in. Like Bilal and Jason know the timing from the rundown, like when the game show should happen so that we can hit like, be respectful of the time. And so they know like, okay, to have somebody, oh, like, hey, nice to see you, like cut it pretty short. Let's get to the game show, throw to a graphic and a loop that I run. And having those, it's live in the sense that we're kind of going with the flow, but we do have different pinnacles and things that we want to hit. So having the segments, I think, is a big part of that. Having the foresight to have the plan and having the chunks so that eventually I'd like to have sponsors on the show where in between that we can have the sponsors and then they kind of seamlessly flow in.
So how is it for you as a producer? You touched it a little bit, but the big thing we see with producers is that some guys they don't know how much they need to jump in or when they need to jump in. Like we've seen, fans get really critical about, oh, the producer's trying to insert himself into the show. We don't want that. But for you, like how are you sort of managing that, knowing like I need to be in this more, oh, I need to take a step back because I'm doing too much. How are you sort of balancing that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think a huge part of it is just not stepping on people's toes because In the game show, I feel there's a little more leeway because I'm an active participant, but I'm silent. Like I am doing the numbers and I'm, chiming in and out here and there where I think something's fun. Like sometimes I don't see the images before the show. So sometimes I'm seeing them and I'm dying laughing and I'm like, I have to comment on this. So like, or bring in something that somebody isn't saying. And then, specifically with Anik and Florian podcast, like nobody's coming to that show to listen to me. Like if I have a minute on that show, like I'm incredibly thankful. I was a listener for years before I was on the show. So it's not my place to like be in and out of traffic there unless I'm called upon. And I do a lot in like the private chat aspect of it to give these guys insights. And yeah, like sometimes I'll come on and mess with Ray a little bit, and that's just busting balls. That's just the fun of the podcast. But I think like a lot of it's just knowing your role. Like, my role in Anik and Florian's product is a lot smaller than my role in the show's product. So I try and measure my output as such.
So when you do MMA podcasts, the big tradition is people are always like, "How did you get into MMA?" and stuff like that. I don't know if I want to go that way with you because I feel like anytime you do a podcast, you're going to get asked. But how did you sort of get into the MMA industry? Because we know you sort of as a background guy since you're a producer. But how did you get into the sort of the industry that you're in now?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as MMA, like I've just been a fan since I was a teenager, like watching Never Back Down or Chuck Liddell, like different things. Like we'd set up a bunch of pillows and couches and fight with each other with UFC gloves that we buy at UFC at Olympia Sports down the way, and just messing around. And then as I grew older, I went through college. I went to Ithaca College where John Jones used to train for like many years. I partied with him. Not like I didn't really know that. I introduced myself one time and I was like, yo, it's like your brother in the NFL is dope. And he's like, haha, which one? I was like, damn, that's a sick comment. That's a sick comeback. I was talking about Chandler, but so that was cool. He's the biggest human I've ever like met in my life. I never felt so in danger,
Oh,
not in
who
danger.
exactly? Chandler?
John. I met
John? Yeah.
John. He's massive human being. But so my connection to the UFC then was just like pay-per-views and John Jones, like the big fights, in college. And then around the time, 2000, I graduated college, 2015, moved here, 2016. Um, and I just had a lot of time. Like I was working a job that I didn't make a ton of money to be able to go out and like party on the weekends and stuff like that. And the UFC, the rise of Connor started happening like right before. I remember really getting into it like right around I was really into the Jones DC feud when it was happening when I was in college. That evolved into, that continued. A lot of the fights that happened after that were just rivalry based, like Connor and Aldo saga happened. The Aldo Connor Mendez, the Rousey loss happened amidst that time. Like just so many things were happening around like the UFC 190 era that I just really started getting into the sport religiously. I remember like there's a point. I'd have to look at when the cards were, but there was a point where I remember started watching religiously, where I was like, I'm watching every single card every Saturday night, regardless. Like that was what I was doing, and I just fell in love with it. I just honestly, my friends used to get alienated with me and pissed because I would just always try and get them, and I'd be like, oh, like there's a sick fight going on this weekend, and they'd be like, I don't know who the hell those guys are. I'm like, all right, well, you should definitely watch. Like just knowing how much I love it, hoping that they would see it one time and like love it. Didn't end up happening. So like, it would end up pissing people off because I would talk about it so much, and just got into loving the sport religiously just through that, just watching week in and week out.
I relate to the friend thing a lot because these posters behind me are from Buffalo Wild Wings. At the end of the event, you try to snag one or something. And the big thing is it started off as, I took my friend with me to Buffalo Wild Wings. It's like, let's go watch the fight and stuff. At the end, I got a poster and he was like, we're going to stay here until we collect every single poster until the whole wall's filled. And he said that after the first event. By like the fourth one, it was like, can we go home after the prelims? Like the prelims? Come on,
Yeah.
man. We have a whole main card. And like half of us at Buffalo Wild Wings is, look, the guy in the white shorts doesn't like the dude in the black shorts because dude in the black shorts says something about his girlfriend. Like I had to sales pitch him every single fight. It's like, here's why we give a shit about this one. And sometimes you have nothing. Sometimes it's just like, look, man, this is a really good ass fight. Like, just watch it, try and enjoy it. But it's some people, it clicks, they get into it. And like you mentioned, the rivalries that gets them in. Others is just there's nothing you can do. They're just gonna sit through it until we get the damn poster and go home.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes I feel like you have to, if you want your friends to be into it, you have to like compartmentalize it for them in a way that will get them hooked.
Yeah.
Like So part of it's like, yeah, I'm gonna sit down and watch at 5 o'clock. But like, if someone else, like, the probability of I know, if you watch a sport for long enough, you can kind of identify, like, here's how these fights are gonna go. If they don't go that way, I'll be
Yeah.
pleasantly surprised. But like, there's a reason the cards are set up the way they are. So a lot of the times, like, I'll watch the prelims and then tell my friends, like, oh, come over at this time, whatever. Like, when do the fights start? I'm like, well, they start at 6, but like, you should come over. Like, you should really want to watch this fight at 8:30. Like, that's the fight that you really want to watch, and then we'll watch through the night. Or some friends are always just going to be the pay-per-view big fight friends, and those are
Yeah.
the friends that you gotta, they ask you for the sneaky links on the low, and you gotta just appease them sometimes to try and get them into the sport.
That for me, that's kind of with the Jake Paul stuff. It's like, hey man, I know you follow this stuff. It's like, no, 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 I don't follow this Paul crap. Okay,
Yeah, right.
but fine, I'll work with you. It's like you got a link, man. Yeah. So it's like, I mean, yeah, we're gonna watch. I didn't say I'm gonna like it. I just said I'm gonna watch. But it's crazy. As soon as something big like that, all of a sudden, all these people who didn't give a shit. Now it's like, hey man, you have the Jake Paul fight. It's like, I hate you, and I hate that I'm answering this
Yeah.
text, and I hate that I'm helping you. But you know what? If maybe we can sit through a fight at Buffalo Wild Wings, then perhaps it's worth it.
Right, right. Everything, like my good buddy John Morgan says, like, you can just have so many good conversations over some frosty beverages at B Dubs, watching fights. Like, that's how great relationships are made. What kind of friendships do you want in this world if you can't sit in a Buffalo Wild Wings and watch people punch each other in the face?
The issue with Buffalo Wild Wings is the food is atrocious. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
you cannot sell people on the food. You couldn't be like, "Hey, man, we'll get pretzel bites." Like it's all ass. Like you're really. I told
yeah,
one my sales pitch was like, "Look, there's some great fights, and in the name of friendship, you should come with me because that's all I got. I
yeah,
can't sell you on this disgusting burger, the wings. I mean, it's gonna
yeah.
upset your stomach, but that's part of the Buffalo Wild Wings experience that we gather for once a month for these fights.
Yeah, I mean, free marketing tip for Buffalo Wild Wings. All you need is like a nacho bar, like just
Yeah.
nacho, just like a fuck ton of nacho chips and cheese. Like, people will be over the moon happy. You could charge like $10 all you can eat nachos. You'll make money hand over fist. So B Dubs, that's what you got to do. Pay per view, all you can eat nachos. Tell them Cody sent you.
So listen, you're the first person that's sort of in the bubble I'm talking to face or screen to screen, I guess we could say, since the Jake Paul fight happened with Tyron Woodley. Did the combat sports fan in you not help yourself? Did you watch it live?
I didn't watch it live just because I was at a Christmas party, but I was watching make Twitter so I could see the highlights. And when it happened and I saw everything going down, I made sure to watch all the angles. And man, just a tough look for T Wood. I mean, I did see that leading up to, like, I saw the rounds, I saw that it was fairly competitive. Like, a lot of people saying the fight kind of sucked
Yeah.
up until that knockout. And I'm glad I didn't watch it, but I just feel bad for T Wood, but he's getting the bag, he's getting the money. And for Jake Paul, like, good for him. Like, no one can say that at this point, like, he's not going in there and talking the talk. Like, he goes in, he said would give T Wood an extra 500K if he could knock him out. He's putting his money where his mouth is, and he just gets to eat it. That's where he gets to take it.
The thing about these YouTube fights is honestly they're awful. Like some of them are so boring. Like and most of the time I'll be watching something and I'll just have it on my phone. That way you can take a quick glance or watch a viral moment. This one I put it on the TV. I was like, maybe T would have let his hands go. That's my fault. I knew better, but so the whole time you're watching it, you're like, these fights suck. Like these guys are, like, look, we're used to high level stuff, but it's like, man, like, dude, why does this stuff keep working? And then he lands the knockout, and you're like, oh boy, this is not going anywhere anytime soon. Like that was the highlight you need to sell people, even though the fight was awful leading up to it.
Yeah. Well, and I love the fact that now they're like boys. I saw that Jake Paul
Ugh,
wants to do like a buddy comedy movie with Tyron, which I think would be actually hilarious. Like, if it was just like a deadpan buddy comedy movie, like kind of like Channing Tatum funny. I
yeah,
think that'd be hilarious. But I thought the matchup to make after that now. So on either side, Le'Veon Bell came out and was like, "Oh, I'll smoke Jake Paul," and Jake Paul was like, "You couldn't smoke T Wood." T Wood versus Le'Veon Bell, dude. Sign me. I'll watch that any day. And then for Jake Paul, I think it's time to step up. Like, you're either gonna fight like higher level MMA competition, and if you're gonna keep doing this crossover thing, which seemingly is making him a lot of money, or you're gonna start fighting actual boxers, at your level, and having these pay-per-view draws for real boxing events instead of for the pay-per-view. I mean, because he's making money. He's one of the best selling boxers of 2021, hand over fist. So can't argue with that.
well, let me ask you this: like, why fight people? Because I see people where it's like you're saying, like fight people that are at your level, or people that like take it like it's an actual combat sports career. But why do that? Why not fight the people like the Le'Veon Bells and take advantage of? big names, big mouths, and no chin or no hands. Like people that think they have hands, they find out. Like, why not just keep taking advantage of guys that aren't taking you serious yet?
Yeah, I think higher the risk, higher the reward. He saw with his big brother, you go up against the greatest of all time, you're going to make greatest of all time money. And that's what, he saw. I don't think he's going to ever, if he boxes, I don't think he'll ever box again, like based on one fight with Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather has done that 50 times. So imagine the kind of money like that generates and what Jake sees and seeing, okay, as I elevate my skill, like he doesn't want to go out there and put himself in harm's like, I think that would be foolish. People are like, oh, he should fight this pro boxer, this champion, yada, yada. Like, dude's not stupid. He's not trying to get brain damage for no reason. Like, if he's gonna fight these guys at a high level, like he's gonna do it the right way. I think good on him. He's young. I don't know how serious he is about going to AKA and training with Javier Mendez, but if that's a serious thing, then he could make, CM Punk had 2 fights in the UFC. He trained, he did it for years. He still trains at Rufus Sport. Like, he's a dedicated martial artist. Why can't Jake Paul do that and make more money and have more fights in the UFC and win in the UFC? I don't think there's anything stopping him from doing that, as much as fans want to hate on that because someone who's 14-0 on a regional circuit can't get in the UFC. Like, unfortunately, that's just the game that it has turned into at some extent.
But you have to see the positive too, because I feel like the UFC, it's a global brand, but it still feels like it's in a bubble. You know what I mean? Like you say UFC, people know, but they know UFC before they know what the sport is. Like you
Yeah.
say MMA, it's like, oh, was that some kind of kung fu? No. So,
Yeah.
you're still like, it's brand recognition, but I feel like those kind of big names, that's going to help push it. Cause the thinking is always people tune in to see Jake Paul and then they might watch like Justin Gaethje. Like that guy doesn't get you in an MMA. Nobody else will. But like, you want to bring that kind of attention. Like, I don't see anything wrong with it. And obviously, when you're looking at it merit based, the regional scene guy, I get it. But the truth is, it's not NBA. There's not 15 spots. And if you take one, like I was talking to Dominic Wooding today, who was saying a matchmaker told him that, oh, the roster's full at bantamweight. That's bullshit. That's so much bullshit. Like, the UFC could sign whoever they want, but they choose not to. So it just, for me, I don't see anything wrong with it if it brings eyeballs to the sport.
Yeah, and I mean, part of that too is, sometimes you have to fill different needs. Sometimes the UFC needs entertainers. Sometimes they need martial artists. Sometimes, if the contender series fights aren't going around where they can get your fights on tape, they can't really have that backing behind you. Like, there's so many different factors that play into it. And I think, that is a huge positive. Exposure is something that benefits you and I greatly in our professional careers. It benefits these fighters. It benefits everybody from the top down. As much as, rev share can become any type of conversation, it doesn't really play into the fact when the sport is still growing. We're, in the 1910s, 1920s of Major League Baseball. Like, look where it is now. Like, yeah, it's declining after 100 years. I'll take that any day for a sport that I'm covering for the majority of my life.
I mean, do you think that though, like with MMA and stuff like that, are we the kind of people, are we getting in it early, even though it feels like it's not that early? Since when you look at it, you compared it to baseball, we are in it early. Does it kind of feel like the kind of thing that at some point we're gonna look back like, I'm glad we got into this thing when we did?
Yeah, well, and I think you see the evolution of the sport just in just in the advancements in the product, looking at it and how many. I think there's a good parallel to be made just with the fact that how technology has advanced and kind of condensed the learning curve a lot of things. That's what the UFC has done. Like, it's only in its infancy as far as a sport, but technology and these things have allowed it to kind of catch up very rapidly. A lot of the pay-per-view model is stuff that, boxing hasn't figured out to the extent that the UFC has, as far as week in and week out, having these amazing events. I think there's so much that can be taken from that. I think as I said, the changing of channels, like so many from Spike TV all the way to Fox, making a huge leap in the sport, making it more, on the same network as an NFL, to now making the jump to ESPN where they have content specific to that from ESPN. Like, it's only going to grow as the sport grows. And I think, there are huge promotions around the world globally that are doing the same thing to evolve the sport as well. One Championship is doing amazing things in Asia. Cage Warriors doing amazing things in the UK. So much growth in the sport globally, especially during COVID, because fighting is very easy to do without fans. Like, people do it all the time, every day, day in and day out. There are fights that we don't ever see that are the best fights that you'll ever see in your life that happen in the gym. That's just the nature of the sport.
I have to say though, man, speaking of the no fans thing, I'm honestly kind of over the stuff at the Apex. I know safety, all that stuff, I get it, but watching UFC 269 and then watching a fight night event a week later with almost no fans, it's not the same. Like the atmosphere, the everything, it just, I know why we're doing it, but it's getting to that point where it's like, I know we're not supposed to say it because safety, but I'm kind of tired of seeing fights in the apex.
Yeah, and one thing that I have tried to just relate to people as far as like we're not gonna so as the Anik and Florian podcast, I feel like we've done a lot to grow our brand during COVID, but you're never gonna see that until they can go to UFC North Dakota, UFC Boise, UFC Houston, Austin, like doing these fight nights out and being on the road, seeing all these arenas filled and seeing the fans connect to the sport in that way. Like there's nothing like a live MMA event. It's like the way that I always compare it is going to if you are a hockey fan and you go to a hockey game and everyone there just cares about hockey, they don't give a shit who wins. That's what you're doing when you go to a fight. Like, yeah, people want fighters to win, but you're not going to a 15 fight card and one fight going to ruin your night most of the time, unless you have a personal friend on the card. So I think is a huge opportunity for the sport to grow even more once it starts going out. When people like you and I can bring a buddy and it's not that expensive, and they're like, "Yo, look at this thing that I saw on ESPN Plus that I've been watching for the last year and a half. Like, it's pretty dope." Going to a live event, you hear people get cracked right in front of you. It's a completely different experience.
Yeah, MMA and hockey too is just some of those sports. Like if you wanted someone to get into it, probably taking them to a live event would do much better than TV. Because I went to a hockey game once, and you're seeing guys get slammed against the glass, and old ladies throwing drinks onto the ice, and you're like, man, this is awesome. And then obviously you translate that over to face punching, which is a version of that, and it just some of those things where live it does something different. However, for people that are a little squeamish, hearing some of those like something like a knee or those disgusting head kicks where you just like thunk. Like, if you're a little squeamish, though, that's definitely gonna turn you off.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing to think about hockey is like if your favorite part about hockey is fighting, you'll love MMA. If
Oh, yeah.
that's something that you hate about hockey, then yeah, definitely don't watch MMA because it's definitely not even the submissions, even some of the ground things. Like all of a sudden, you're like to the untrained eye, they're like, "Oh my god, what's happening?" Oh my, oh his shoulders out. Oh my god, like he can't move his arm. Like it happens in an instant. That's part of why we love the sport and why it is one of those things where like, yeah, if your husband likes golf, like yeah, you'll sit and watch golf half-assedly and like say you're interested, but like MMA, like that is something where if you're against it, like it's not gonna work, honey. Like, sorry. Like,
Yeah. No, and that's the thing too is, that sometimes I realize, like, not every casual person understands what they're watching. Like, we were watching I'm thinking back Bilal versus, Damian Maya, and then at the end, I was like, "Okay, Bilal got that round." And everybody's like, "How do you know that?" It's like, "What do you mean,
yeah,
how do you know that?" I was like, "It's obvious to me 'cause it's like, "Yeah, it's Bilal." "I don't understand, man. It just seems like 2 guys go." Oh, so you're like, "Alright." Damage, and then you gotta go through the judging, which is like they're not 100% sure what
yeah,
they're looking at either, but you're like, "Look, whoever looks like they're fucking up the other guy more, that's who you have to go with." But you realize, like, for the untrained eye, which, I don't even see that anymore because I know what I'm looking at, but for a lot of people, it just looks like a bunch of guys throwing different stuff, and then at the end of the round, you're like, "Oh, let's see who got it."
yeah, yeah. Well, and that is the funny part is, it becomes so easy to then talk to your friends about it. You're like, "Oh yeah, like this is what happened in that round." They're like, What do you mean? How did this, that?" And it's like, yeah, I don't have enough 42 seconds left in the middle of this round right now. Like, I'm gonna watch this Modelo commercial and hopefully something happens in the second round. Like sometimes you gotta, as a fan too, you just deposit it in the bank and you're like, okay, on to the next. A lot of the fights, sometimes when you have to convince your, they're like, "Oh, like that fight sucked, whatever." And you're like, "Yeah, but there was two banger fights before that, and then they put that fight there on purpose to like slow it down a little bit, and then these next fights are gonna be good. Like just stick it, just hang, like trust me, these fights are gonna be good."
You know what? That's exactly how I was with UFC 266 because we have Diaz Lawler, and then my friend's like, "I don't understand why you're excited." I was like, "You're saying that because you don't know Prime Bob Lawler and you don't know Nick Diaz." Fight happens, everyone in Buffalo Wild Wings screaming, throwing shit. My friend was like, "Oh, that was insane." I was like, "Yeah." The Shevchenko fight came, and we know how she fights, man. She fights clean. She's gonna fuck you up. You're not even 100% sure what you watch. You just know she's dominating. And he was like, "Yeah, man, that ruined it from the last fight and stuff." I was like, "Well, hold on now, because we still got our main event to go." I was like, "You might not be able to appreciate that one. I can understand that, but I was like, wait for the main event." And obviously, Volkanovski Ortega was insane.
Yeah.
Fight almost gets finished like 13 times, which is exactly the kind of thing you need for someone to get invested. And at the end of the night, be like, "Oh, but then he had the thing." You're like, "Yeah, man, that's face punching."
Yeah. Hey, that's why we love the sport. Like for every, sometimes when you're watching sometimes it feels too good to be true. And you have a couple of good weeks back to back of events, you're like, man, like we're overdue for like one of those sleeper cards that
Yeah.
that is just not good. And then, we've just been blessed. There hasn't been many of those in the last 2 years, really. Like, I think we've had so many good fights. It's just crazy to see the evolution of that as well. Like, part of the roster churn in a way, like, has been very positive as far as the product is concerned.
I will say though, there was one event that I knew for a fact, like I'm not inviting any friends over because that's probably gonna turn them off. But Caitlin Vieira versus Misha Tate, like I appreciate all of them and stuff, but you knew looking at it on paper, you're not gonna sell anyone with that one. And people forgot about it the next day. I saw it because I looked at the news cycle and nobody was talking about it. And you're like, but that's the way it is though. Certain cards, you know what you're in for.
Yeah, well, and sometimes fighters get screwed just with where the fights end up. Like, if
Yeah,
you're a week or two before a massive fight, like, yeah, you're not going to get that much of the pub or that much of
yeah.
the attention. And that's just kind of, or you're the week after an amazing event or 2 weeks after. Like, sometimes the layover effect does come into play. And then, yeah, if you're one of those odd cards that starts at 1 p.m. on a Saturday, or 9 a.m. on a Saturday, like, that makes it difficult too. Like, sometimes as a fan, it's even hard to keep up with. You. Oh wait, the fights have already started. Like, damn, I got to tune in.
You dropped sort of a bomb on us earlier that I feel like we have to come back to, where you mentioned the famous partying with John Jones. And I feel like that's kind of the big thing is everybody always like, there's no way John Jones is that good Christian character. He shows behind the scenes. What can you tell us from being out with John Jones that night? You can't reveal everything I know, but what can you tell us from, it sounds like there's been some legendary nights concerning John Jones.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've never heard any. There was never anything bad that I heard about. Like, I knew people that ran with John Circle, and nothing too crazy. I don't think that was really massive on his partying days. I think that was in the first, like, around the first Gus fight, maybe before that, before he really started to hammer down. But he was calm demeanor. Like, wasn't like a huge center of attention guy, which you'd expect out of somebody who's so massive. But no, it wasn't ever really a thing about that. It was more so that it was just crazy to see him at, like, it was just known that he trained in the area. It was just so random, like, but then to find out he was from upstate New York, and that, like, ingratiated me, like, as a fan with him as well. So unfortunately, it's tough to have John's back sometimes, but I've always had his back as far as, like, that's my greatest fighter of all time. So, that counts for something.
John is one of those guys I feel like people need to learn how to just, maybe appreciate the fighter, appreciate what you watch in the cage, and then maybe just leave the other shit away, to maybe separate the person from the athlete. Because John, it's like every time you think he's got his shit together, here comes ESPN with a big article about John Jones. You're like, fuck, man. Like, just, I want to see this guy fight 3 times a year. And it feels like it's always something.
Yeah, I mean, look, like, these guys fight in a cage for a living, like, especially with with the early days of the sport, like, the characters that got into fighting, they were characters. Like, the early days of Ultimate Fighter,
Well,
like, these guys are getting paid nothing to go out there and do something they love, and they're going out there and kicking each other's ass to do it. And as the sport grows older, like, you see fighters that start at such an early age, like, Macy Barbers, or Sage Northcutt's a good example again, where they start with that level of professionalism, throughout the sport. So I think the kind of characters that run in the circles of MMA, aren't, you know, that anymore. But it just goes to show you sometimes, there's a lot of stuff that goes on, with other sports that maybe we're not as insulated from. Whereas in MMA, it's seemingly like everybody's dirty laundry's out there all the time. Like, so and so's fighting at this gym, like, blah 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 blah. And I think just part of that is knowing these guys are human. Like, these guys are fighters. Sometimes not every baseball player is Mike Trout. So I think that's part of what you have to keep in mind. Like, for everyone that hates Connor, like, maybe some of that is you can't have Connor as a role model. If
yeah.
Connor's your role model for the stuff that he does outside the octagon, that's negative, then that's an opinion that maybe you need to think about for yourself. But you know, donating to charities and things like that, like, those are not things that I think are bad. And I think the book is still out on John Jones. Like, the dude's still young. He could go on to have a 10-year heavyweight career where he's a saint. And are people going to give him remorse or forgiveness for all the stuff before? Probably not. So can't please everybody.
I have to say, one of my favorite interviews of all time has to be when John Jones took the walk with Ariel Helwani through the woods, and they were just kind of going over, and he finally, like, for a second, it's like, look, man, I smoke a lot of weed, you know what I mean? He's like, I drink a lot. You're like, finally, that's,
Mhm.
and he was still holding back on us, but it was like, finally we figure out who this guy is, because we find out months later he's getting in trouble for dick pills, and it's like, hold on. Where was this I love Christ guy? Like, you're not
Yeah.
taking dick pills, but I love that he finally peeled back the curtain a little bit and we got to see a little bit more of, who's this, John Jones guy and who is he really?
Yeah, well, and I think that's the honesty that brought me closer to the sport too. Is just that like these guys are so much more accessible than other athletes seemingly, and that's
Yeah.
part of what ingratiated me with the sport. That's how I made my entry into the sport. Was I was working real estate marketing. I saw that Ali Quinta was doing real estate in Long Island. I reached out to him, was like, "Hey, here's some things in real estate marketing. Like I think we do together, yada yada." We didn't end up doing like much together, but then 6 months down the line, Aljamain was talking about doing a podcast, and I DM'd him and I was like, "Yo, Al can vouch for me and my professionalism. Like, I would love to be involved in helping you to start this podcast. Like, I love you as a fan. Like, I think it's something that could be great." And I wouldn't have been able to do that with maybe like insert famous player here, for Mac Jones of the Patriots. Like that's just not a reality. And for me, the closest of these fighters and the accessibility and kind of part of the credit to that goes to the UFC and to Dana White for letting these guys have a personality, and like they're going to have their opinions, and the company's not going to agree with all of them, but they're not going to muzzle people. And I think a lot of that connection to the sport to me is valued in the authenticity.
The crazy thing is just how accessible they are. Like knowing that, sometimes you can send a social media message to like a top 5 guy. And if they read it, there's a good chance they'll get back to me. But yeah, I can sit down and do an interview. In no other sport, you could barely, I don't think you could get a G League guy from the NBA to sit down and do like a 10-minute Skype interview with you. So
Right.
to think like you have, and then, you see it all the time, right? Colby does an interview with a guy you've never heard of before. And like, how the fuck did he get Colby? But still, like, it's crazy to me how these guys are willing to do it. Even remember the show, like, you couldn't do remember the show NBA style. Like that would be awful trying to get these guys to come on and everybody's busy and all these agents and stuff. But MMA, it's like these guys are willing to sit down and do this. And for the fans, I don't think they realize, just how much content they can get from fighters being willing to be so accessible.
Yeah. Well, and I've scaled back, but when I was first getting into the sport, I would ingest everything, like
Yeah.
everyone's individual media scrums, like to hear the different questions. Like I would listen to everything that I could just to like be closer to the sport and feel more knowledgeable. And that accessibility is part of why I just love the sport. It's why that's why it's allowed me to become so close to the sport because of that. Because being a genuine person and like having honesty and characteristics goes a long way for fighters, and just being authentic. Like these guys get so much bullshit day in and day out, and all they literally have to just focus on themselves and their career, and it's a very tough push and pull when you're trying to meet all of those things. And yeah, I just think guys like you and being able to bring out the different aspects of people in the sport is just of huge value, and why the sport continues to grow.
I mean, you mentioned Aljamain Sterling. Like he's one of those guys. Like I've given him credit for making content and keep going with the videos and stuff. Because it obviously I don't have any fans, but if I was in Aljamain Sterling's like place and I had that many people talking shit to me constantly on social media, I'd be like, fuck you guys. Like you don't get access to me. Lock down those accounts so I don't have to see that shit. No more videos on YouTube. Like it is tough to keep like a good. I want to keep doing content. I want to keep putting my thoughts out there when people are going at you for everything constantly. Like hats off to him because there's a lot of people that say, man, fuck you guys.
Yeah, well, and I just think like that part of the game can eat you up. The pressure can eat you up. Like we saw, I think the main example that comes to my mind is when Eddie Alvarez fought Conor McGregor. Like the moment was just too big for him.
Yeah.
Like that Conor just enveloped him in that entirety of that spectacle. And that can happen to these guys in fights sometimes. And Aljamain, to his credit, is such a mentally tough individual. And someday an autobiography and a movie will be written about Aljo's story, and people will know why he's so mentally tough. And it's just going to be amazing because like part of that is also coming, part of it's honestly I think a New England, not New England, but a Northeast thing where like you're used to, you have to have a tough skin. Like you're used to your teammates going at you, your friends going, like your friends are the harshest critics to you, and in the funniest ways they roast you, but like they love you at the end of the day. And then that's part of like the mentality I think that he takes upon with social is like, not everyone's gonna like me, and I don't give a shit if they do, and I don't give a shit if they don't, but I'm just gonna be me. And I think that comes with, I admire that level of honesty, like to be able to put that out there and not be able to be like, to be unabashedly yourself is something I think that spans a lot of different sports, not just MMA.
And I'll be honest, like I interviewed him a few times, before when he's still working his way up to the UFC, but he's not like an easy interview. Like a lot of guys, they sort of, even if you ask them a dumbass question, they'll still find a way to work with you. But Aljamain, it was like, if you're gonna interview me, it's got to be no bullshit. Like if your question sucks, my answer's gonna suck. Like that's he's a very smart guy, and first time I interviewed him, I wasn't quite ready for that, and then you realize going into it the next time, like, all right, no bullshit with this guy. Like really, I got to be on my game if I'm gonna talk to someone like Aljamain.
Yeah, well, different strokes for different folks, right? Because you get on with some people and they need to shoot the shit for like 5 to 10 minutes before you can get anything out
Yep.
of them, and that's part of the I think the hilarious, not hilarious, but that's part of the intriguing part about fighters is like some of these guys are Valentina Shevchenko. They eat, sleep, train, kill people for money, go around the world. That's all they do. And then some of these guys are Chris Dawkins, working formerly as a police officer and then making money as a UFC fighter. Like they runs the gamut. Like not all fighters are the same.
Yeah, some people do need that sort of, warm them up before you can ask the question. Some fighters, like if you have a guy on and they're there to like promote something specific, like a TV show or something, nah, you'd be like, "How are you today?" "I'm great since I did this show coming out Thursday." And you're like, "Oh, okay, this is what we're doing." Or you ask
Yeah.
them about a fight and they'll find a way to like bring up their book that's coming out. It's like, I'll get to it, man. But when they come on, they have something specific, like they're good about finding a way, anything. Like, "Oh, it was a warm day, which is why I read my book." And you're like, "Oh, for fuck's sake, here we go." But some people need it. Some people, it's like, I know what I'm promoting and I'm going to promote it.
Yeah, well, and it's reps, like being comfortable when the green light's on. Like you got to be able to turn that switch on in your brain to be able to have that skill because like we've said, like putting butts in the seats is a part of the sport. Like that's just the long and the short, just like it is on the regional scene when you literally have to go out and sell tickets to put butts in the seats. It doesn't change as you get older. You just have to do it in different ways. You have to do it through social media. A lot of these guys get huge opportunities, especially Charles Oliveira makes incredible amounts of money in sponsorship because of what Brazil allows him to do. Like, can do that without the personality and being able to put himself out there. I think even a lot of the negativity that Kevin Durant puts out there like still gets him more attention and more followers and more of a fan base, and that's a great thing when it comes to filling your pockets.
So tell me a little bit about working with John Anik, because you're working with one of the most, obviously you work with both Aniks, but John Anik's one of the most beloved guys. Like I saw on Twitter, everybody was talking about the commentators. I was like, I don't want to see anything about John Anik.
Yeah.
But people were good about it. I was like, we all agree. We love John Anik. We'll let that one go. But what's it like working with him? Because it sounds like he's really good about when I'm on camera, when I'm on the broadcast, there's a certain way that I am. And then behind the scenes, we know there's a few more F bombs and stuff like that. What's it like working with John Anik?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a better professional in the game. Like, as far as inside the octagon, outside the octagon, like just a great dude. Like, there's tons of people that can attest to the things that John does that aren't within the job description, for people of the sport. He does the podcast. He's adamant about the podcast never being behind a paywall so that it can always be free for the fans. And he's one of the hardest working individuals that I've ever seen inside and outside of the sport. When they came to the New York for the UFC, I was able to go and have lunch with him in the city, and we went back to the hotel room for like 15 minutes, just to kill time. And he's like, "Oh, let me bang out like one or two promos here," and he just like put his headset on and started like rewriting the copy, and then just like boom, like running them. He's like, "How'd that sound? Was that good?" He's like, "I'm gonna do another one." And he, boom, like does it like it's just nothing to him to be able to. I wish that people understood the level that he operates on to really. It's something that I think I have to point out to him sometimes where I'm like, you can go on there and find negative comments if you're Bisping or literally if you're any other person besides John, you can find the negative comments. I have a hard time finding negative things about John. People being like, "Oh, let's get Goldie back on there." Like, I have never seen that in my life. Like, that's probably a bot.
That's the thing too. Like when everybody was going through the commentators, it's like I appreciated how much everybody likes John Anik. Like he's been on the podcast before, and he's a really likable guy. But it's like I'm glad we can agree that some people are untouchable. You know what I mean? Like the Goldies and the Rogans, like they were great in their prime. Now they're on their own, man. Because it's like appreciate them if you like them or if you don't like them. But John Anik, it's like he's untouchable. Like and there's a good reason for it.
Yeah, well, and I think it's all part of the entertainment, like part of the fun of it is you get the different styles in the commentary for me, you get different. I'd like to think that there's some foresight that goes into that as far as like, oh, so and so would be great on this call, so and so would be great on this. Like, I like the attention to the detail that the UFC production crew goes into to set these guys up for success. Like, I think we've seen it a lot in the evolution of, Megan and Laura's roles, where, as the product evolves, like their roles evolve and they become more seamless in the broadcast. And I think, it's just great to see that the product as a whole, for better, for better or for worse, there's a lot more positive than negative, I believe, about the commentary and the production.
So speaking of the commentary, if you had to pick a three-man booth for a big pay-per-view, just based off who you like to listen to, who do you enjoy, who are the three guys you would pick?
So Anik and Rogan to me are top standard. Like the negativity for Rogan, like people can have it if they want, but I love Joe Rogan on a pay-per-view.
Yeah,
That's part of what I love about the sport. And then the third pick, I would go with a flyer. I would go Brian Stan. I'd bring
yeah.
Brian Stan back for like if they could do a show at like West Point or something for like 20,000 Army people and have, Brian Stan there
Oh,
doing the in
yeah.
octagon interviews, like that'd be amazing for me. But, using the live crew, I think I would probably go Anik, DC, and now definitely Anik, DC, Cruz, because I think that would just be amazing. And watching those three together now after the whole incident,
Oh man.
but I like the different styles of like analytical versus like DC brings a different element to the broadcast that other people can't, and I think that's part of what makes DC one of the most likable commentators in the sport.
I have to say though, I'm really impressed by Paul Felder. Like I know some people feel like they force him into there because we know people like him. Paul Felder, I feel like he meshes well with everyone. Does such a great job. Like obviously we know Anik will work with anybody. He'll make it work and it'll sound amazing. But Paul Felder, I feel like he's really figuring it out with guys like Brendan Fitzgerald. Like Paul Felder for me, like he's really like the way I look at it. I don't necessarily love all the fighters turn commentators, but Paul Felder for me, he's a different standard.
Yeah, well, and I think part of what works for Paul is the fact that he can now just focus on it full time, and he
Yeah.
can be a personality. Whereas before, you do have to toe the line, and like as we saw with the Diego Sanchez video behind the scenes, like Paul is
Oh, I
Paul
love
don't give a
that.
shit. Like that he's as real as they get. Like you don't want to like the same guy on Twitter that claps back at people is one who, if you said that to him in a grocery store, like he'd say the same thing to your face. So I think being able to turn that switch for him was, incredible for his career. And that's what's helped the evolution of, Felder in the booth. I think he is, in that top tier as far as, if you want to interchange people here and there for pay-per-view like they do with Abu Dhabi, like he's one of the people you call upon.
Completely forgot about that Joshua Fabia thing. I just love the what the fuck are you talking about? Like I
Yeah,
feel like
well,
he
and
spoke for everyone.
you have to know that like what was going on in his head for like the 10 minutes before that where he wasn't saying anything. Like that's to get to that point where he was just like, I'm done with this guy.
But the thing is, he has that confidence too. It's like, what are you going to do to me, Joshua Fabia? Are you going to throw some gems at me? Are you going to meditate? Like, what are you going to
Yeah.
do? I'm Paul fucking Felder.
Well, and so he did it on the commentary as well this weekend during Bilal's fight when someone's like, there's someone chanting
Yeah, yeah.
USA and Bilal's from Chicago, idiot. So that I just think a little bit of that chip on your shoulder is great. Like Bisping has it too, as far
Oh
as
yeah.
like when he gets going and he gets animated. Like I love that about Bisping.
Yeah, you mentioned liking Joe Rogan. I have to say, like, I don't understand why everybody turned on him. I'll be honest, like, I try not to say any things. I don't give a fuck about arguing on Twitter, but I appreciate Joe Rogan on a big pay per view, man. I don't know why people hate him. Like, I don't. What do people want out of commentary? Like, it sounds like they all want someone to break down every single little thing. I appreciate Joe Rogan. There's certain combinations that work really well. I think he's really good with Anik. I don't know, man. I still appreciate Joe Rogan, even though I guess everybody thinks he's going to come on and he's going to get political for the whole pay-per-view, which has never happened ever. I don't know, man. I think people haven't been able to separate what they don't like about him and what he still does well in the broadcast.
Yeah, for sure. And as his star power has risen and grown over the years, like seemingly the knock on his commentary has grown as well. And that's just comes with the territory, as you get more of a fan base, there's going to be more haters. And I think Joe is still a high level black belt. Like he's still a very accomplished grappling and taekwondo specialist in his own right. Like there's more video of, Rogan out there knocking people out than 99% of sports commentators doing their job. Like part of the difficulty too, I think that gets a lot of criticism is like, this is MMA, man. Like you're not going to be able to Tony Romo this shit. Like
Yeah.
you can sit there and guess this, that, the other all you want, but when someone throws a ducking feint to a spinning wheel kick and you have no idea what's happening, like that's part of why we love this sport. So sometimes they're in grappling exchanges, people want to call the curse on the commentators when they're like, oh, it's tight, like he's got him, he's almost there. Like they're sitting there 6-7 feet away. Like who are we to say?
I appreciate it when I think UFC 269. Once it was during the Jillian Robertson fight, he was getting technical when they were on the ground, and I'm like, part of me is like, you know what, shut these guys up. Like, remind them that you know what the fuck you're talking about. You know what I mean? There's too much like, oh, he doesn't know.
Yeah,
Still, I'm pretty sure he has 2 different black belts in jujitsu. Like, if
yeah,
there,
it's high level.
one of the knocks on him at first was like, you talk too much about jujitsu. I know Rampage got mad at him. He's like, you only care about the jujitsu guys, but sometimes you got to remind people a little bit, like, I know what the fuck I'm talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, man. So listen, to end this thing, I'm sure you've got a shitload of stuff to plug. 'Cause I believe you do have your own marketing business as well. But you have a bunch of shows, social media, stuff like that, man. If you have anything you need to plug, and now's the time to do so.
Well, hey, follow me at Cody Merrow on all the social media platforms, merrowmarketing.com, anikflorianpodcast.com. Get your merch. Remember the show Thursdays, Anik Florian Pod on YouTube and audio. And Lucas, thank you for the time, my friend. It was a great conversation, and just looking forward to more exciting events in 2022.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming on, man. I appreciate you.
Thanks, man.